Okay, hello everyone. Today I'm with Professor Andrew Chubb of Lancaster University, an expert on China in the world and China-UK relations in general. And we're going to talk today about the Chinese embassy issue. So China are currently attempting to build a new quoted mega embassy on the site of the former Royal Mint Court in London. Now, this embassy will be the biggest in Europe and will sit between the City of London and the Tower of London, being a very central and very important part of London. Now, there are a variety of safety issues and kind of diplomatic issues with this. There are proposed underground cables beneath the site, which may carry sensitive data around banks, institutions, political power, and also many worries about the Chinese state as a whole, with their sort of plans to crack down on protests, both in China and in the UK, along with other issues of general spying. There are positives too, though. You know, a bigger embassy can bring in more investment, can bring in more jobs, more cooperation between the UK and China, potentially settle tensions in the South China Sea and do many other things. But we have an actual expert here today to talk about. So, hi, Andrew. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks, Aaron.
So, what are your kind of overall views on the Chinese embassy then? Like, are you pro? Are you against it? What do you think?
I'm going to give you a very academic answer and say that it depends, of course. And the main thing that, from my point of view, the main thing that it depends upon is the assessments regarding those alleged sensitive cables that supposedly run under the site. Now, I'm not a technical expert, and I think the technical experts exist within the government. And so whether it should be approved or not, ultimately, in my view, comes down to the technical recommendation. If the a foreign power occupying a site under which sensitive cables that could potentially put the UK's financial system or otherwise put the UK's financial system or national security in jeopardy, are in fact run under that site, then you'd be crazy to approve it. On the other hand, if the cables that run under the site are not conceivably national security relevant, then I think it's probably in the UK's interests to, stick with the decision that's been made to allow the Chinese so-called mega embassy to open there. Now, you mentioned a few different issues and considerations that might mitigate sort of against the idea that China could be allowed to occupy this particular site, including the expansion of potential espionage activities. And that, I think, is, clearly something that is almost inevitable. All countries spy, and basically all countries will center their spying operations out of their embassy by and large. The counterpoint to that, though, is that currently the PRC is situated at several sites around London and around the UK. And in the absence of this mega embassy on the site of the Royal Mint in London, their spying operations can be presumed to be more distributed around different sites. And so potentially from the UK's national security point of view, it could actually be beneficial to sort of keeping tabs on those types of activities to have them centralized in one place.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point because it kind of comes back to what I was going to bring up later about the recent Times investigation on Chinese embassy officials and stuff. And I don't know if you've read it, but the Times ran an investigation and they found that for the last 2 years, every 2 months, a new official has been added to the Chinese kind of like embassy staff list, maybe whether they're like a diplomat, a cultural person, some secretary, whatever. And they found a lot of properties, houses, flats, etc., that are owned by the PRC but not listed as official residencies. And most of these are in London. Well, the vast majority are in London. And as such, do you think that like China are consolidating their position in London rather than being spread across? I think it's like these are consulates, but like Belfast, Manchester, and Edinburgh, maybe.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any plans from the PRC side to close down any of their sort of consulates in different places. The Belfast one is very interesting. Why the PRC has a consulate in Belfast. Many possible explanations for that. A very interesting case, but perhaps a different conversation. But I do think that centralising as much of that PRC diplomatic or undercover activity as possible on specific sites is potentially something that the UK's national security might well have been a factor in the UK's national security agency not making stronger recommendations against the proposal for a Chinese mega embassy on the property that they own at the Royal Mint. So again, going back to these sort of basic national security considerations, either it is threatening to the UK's national security to have a Chinese mega embassy on this particular site, in which case the UK shouldn't allow it. Or it's, on balance, not a bad thing for the UK's national security, either because, cables aren't that sensitive, or there's ways of mitigating that risk, or the information that's currently being transmitted through sensitive cables running under the site can be rerouted through another route. I'm not sure. All of these are very technical questions, but I would expect that if there were fundamental national security concerns about the PRC occupying this site with its embassy, then the security agencies and the technical experts should be making that very clear to the government, and the decision should follow logically that it wouldn't be allowed.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like, the big mystery is like, what are these cables? Like, do the Chinese know more than the general public do? Do the British government know for sure? Like, it's a real big question. But I think for me personally, the biggest red flag is that in the planning documents that China has brought through, there are basement rooms that are redacted. There are rooms that are either not there that should be there, or there are rooms that there's no official use for and they won't say. And I know we remain neutral, of course, but that is a very strange thing for any government to do. Not just Chinese or whatever. It's just a very strange thing to be like, oh yeah, we're going to build a embassy in your country, but we're not going to tell you what's in the embassy.
Yeah, that's an interesting data point in this whole conversation. My own sense of it is that the fact that they have not provided specific usages for specific rooms is not necessarily a red flag in and of itself, because at the end of the day, governments lie all the time. And if there were nefarious purposes that they wished to sort of hide from the UK, that they were putting certain rooms within the Royal Mint complex into use of, there's nothing to really stop them from coming up with some untrue story about how it's being used as a shared office or a hot desking site, or the cultural attaches, cultural center, or whatever it might be. It's really nothing to stop them lying about this stuff. And so the fact that there's sort of blank spots in the plans is not in and of itself, to me, a particular red flag.
Right, okay. So do you think that the reason for these missing or hidden rooms or whatever is more just an attempt to conceal, not necessarily nefarious aspects of their plans, but just keep some things under lock and key? For what reason would you think?
I actually don't have a good answer to you about that. Since if I was the PRC government and I wanted to sort of have certain parts of my embassy available for my use, out of the purview of the host country, in this case, the UK, I would probably be making up some kind of story for how those rooms would be used, rather than leaving them blank in the proposed plans. So I'm not quite sure what's gone on there.
Yeah, it's a real interesting one, and I know that in our emails you said that you don't believe that they're going to be used for torture rooms or whatever, and I think those claims are very much not based in fact. But I think it speaks to a much more wider set of fears around, the Chinese government's conduct towards Chinese citizens in the UK, Hong Kong citizens in the UK, of course, as well. And do you think that people in the UK will be threatened by this new embassy, like we've seen huge protests from Hong Kong people? Do you think they have a reason to be worried, or is it more just like China bad, we should be scared of China?
That's a really important question. As you know, Aaron, I work on the issue of transnational repression, of which China is probably the world's most nefarious perpetrator. That's where you seek to coerce people in another country in order to restrict their exercise of fundamental rights and freedoms, like freedom of speech and freedom of association and freedom of assembly.
Yeah.
And I very much sympathize with those in the Hong Kong community, Chinese dissidents, Uyghur community, Tibetan community, who feel that an expanded Chinese diplomatic presence could be threatening in terms of expanding the space for the PRC to be able to engage in these types of transnational repression operations out of the embassy. However, from a sort of political analysis point of view, I don't actually see the PRC's overseas transnational repression operations as being constrained by the size of their embassy at this point in time. As far as I'm aware, these types of operations are very often carried out inside the PRC's borders, whereby the PRC is threatening other people's family members over things that they have said inside the UK, or they're using proxies, such as sort of front groups and their political allies, in order to intimidate and harass those who speak out against the PRC government. And as far as I'm aware, from my understanding of this issue of transnational repression, an expanded embassy is not likely to result in greater freedom of action for the PRC in terms of carrying out these operations. Dealing with those fundamental violations of the human rights, the most basic human rights of people inside the UK territory, dealing with that problem, I don't see that as being particularly closely related to whether the embassy is allowed or not. What's needed instead is a crackdown on harassment and coercive behaviours on behalf of the PRC party state and many other states that actually engage in this type of operation against targets in the UK.
Yeah.
It needs law enforcement to be trained and educated in the types of situations that people in diaspora communities and political refugees are facing on overseas soil, including in the UK.
Yeah.
And it requires diplomatic representations by the UK that actually takes up the issue. When someone inside the UK's territory is being coerced via threats to their family members, for example, inside China's borders or in Egypt or in Saudi Arabia or in Turkey or in any of the other perpetrator countries. There's more than 50 perpetrator countries in Freedom House's database on transnational repression. That's how the UK needs to be pushing back against transnational repression. I don't actually see how refusing the Royal Mint site as an embassy site is actually going to constrain the PRC from engaging in transnational repression operations.
Oh, that's really interesting. They're very much a view that isn't shared by like a lot of like the big media companies and stuff, like they're trying to push the narrative and stuff. But do you think that on the inverse, it could actually help the UK tackle this? Like you said, that having all like the majority of China's spy network concentrated in one building would be beneficial. Would it be potentially beneficial to have most of their like transnational aggression agents and actors kind of set in one place to both like see it when it's happening and also tackle it at its root?
I'm not sure. I'm certainly not saying that approving the embassy on that site would be beneficial to tackling transnational repression. I mentioned before that I see, potential counter-espionage benefits in terms of if more of the PRC's espionage activities are concentrated in one place as a result of them moving to that larger site. Then that could be beneficial to the UK in terms of keeping tabs on that activity.
Yes.
But I certainly don't see any potential that approving the site would actually have benefits in terms of tackling the issue of transnational repression. My point is simply that a larger embassy site, as far as I'm aware, doesn't present any reasons to believe that the campaigns of transnational repression would be expanded. And if in fact they were expanded, and then that's fundamentally a problem of the UK permitting these types of activities to expand and not taking action to counter them, which is available in terms of law enforcement. It is against the law. National Security Act, prohibits interference on behalf of a foreign power with the exercise of convention rights, like the Bill of Rights, the European Convention on Human Rights, of any person within the United Kingdom. And so it's a question of enforcing the law rather than being a result of this particular decision over whether the PRC's embassy is sited in one place or another, or is larger or smaller. Fundamentally, what are illegal behaviours on the UK territory need to be, prosecuted, and the ways in which the PRC can coerce and transnationally repress targets inside the UK, for example, with bounties on Hong Kong refugees, activists from Hong Kong, a very strong sort of intimidatory effect that's generated by those. That needs a diplomatic pushback, maybe even economic sanctions against those who put the bounties in place, which has this effect of violating people's rights inside the UK. Likewise, when people's families are coerced over actions, their lawful, speech and freedom of association that they exercise inside the UK government needs to be pushing back directly against that with diplomatic representation saying that we are watching this issue, we are aware that you are doing this, it's violating the rights of people on our territory, we are duty bound under international law. Talking about the basic international human rights law of the ICCPR actually requires the UK to be creating an environment in which all people, regardless of their background, can exercise the most fundamental rights. And so the UK is duty bound to be taking these actions, regardless of the particular embassy site that the PRC is occupying at any given time.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Like, it's very much on the UK to deal with the negative actions of another rather than to try and be like, oh, don't do that bad thing. I think that's a really good point, that like this big issue around like transnational regression and stuff in the UK isn't just China doing bad things and we're powerless. There's a part for the government to play, and a kind of part for everyone to play too, and like pressurizing these bad things. But moving on to more like positive things, do you think the embassy can have any positive impacts? Like, do you think if this embassy is approved and all the security issues are like non-consequential, say, do you think that there'll be a positive step in relations, economic relations, political relations?
I think that's possible. It's not really clear under the current government or the previous government what exactly the UK is seeking from its relationship with China. There's been an acknowledgement from successive governments that there exist opportunities to be seized and risks to be mitigated and threats to be dealt with. In fact, the current government has actually affirmed that China poses a range of national security threats, which is of course an obvious reality. But I think probably one of the purposes of a larger embassy, where it does actually make a difference, would be to position more of these kind of economic bureaucrats to look for opportunities and be available for UK actors to be able to come in and forge cooperative relationships that could be mutually beneficial in areas that were actually defined as being safe and sort of in everybody's benefit, that the UK and China is cooperating. Now, what exactly those areas are has not been specified, and there's no clear strategy yet. from the UK government, and that's not the current government, but previous governments as well, were in this mode of kind of having their cake and eating it too. We're going to seize all the opportunities and we're going to counter all the threats. And that's how we're going to manage relations with China. The reality, of course, is far more complex. There's all sorts of trade-offs involved. As we know, just from the fundamental frameworks of kind of economic, economic statecraft and geoeconomics in the current era, any degree of trade creates a point of leverage that that the other party can potentially wield. If you're deriving benefits from trade, then those benefits can be taken away by the other party, and that creates the opportunity for coercive leverage. So there is no such thing as sort of risk-free trade. At the same time, do you want to just, because of that reality, do you want to sort of close yourself off from any kind of cooperation, particularly against the background of existential climate crisis, China's growing capabilities in terms of green technologies and the like, China's potential to mobilize its kind of excess capital for investments in parts of the UK that are looking for external investment. I'm not an economic policymaker, so I'm not here to answer those questions. But the UK currently lacks a strategy for actually defining what it sees as being beneficial kinds of engagements with China and what the ultimate endpoint that it's trying to get to from the conduct of its China policy. It's sort of just working on a sort of ad hoc basis. But back to to return to the kind of substance of your question, yes, expanded embassies provide opportunities for expanded spying and expanded intelligence gathering, more equipment, more spies, but also more diplomats, more economic bureaucrats, more facilities to be able to facilitate sub-state, delegations from parts of China that may have economic complementarities with the UK. So the risks and threats both exist, and so do the economic opportunities. And what's needed is some kind of framework for evaluating which one is going to take precedence in terms of the UK's actual policy making. That's what the UK is lacking right now.
Yeah. So it seems that there's like a real opportunity then for the UK to kind of like maximize this opportunity. If balanced right, it could go really well, and if balanced wrongly, it could be a real failure of policy. So if the UK is kind of in the middle ground of like a purgatory of what they're going to do, why do you think China has went for this embassy? Why do you think China has decided to like compound all embassies into one and chose the Roman core? Like, what's their rationale behind it, in your view?
That's a very good question. So one thing that the academic research on Chinese foreign policy and Chinese politics more generally often seems to come up with as explanations for PRC behaviour is that the PRC party state really cares about status symbols.
Yeah.
And so one possible explanation here, and I think given the choice of the site and the astronomical expense of it as well, is that there is an element of status here in terms of the site that they want to occupy, prominence in the centre of London, and its sort of historical value, and the like. I also think that this embassy site and the expansion of the PRC diplomatic presence is also a result of some legacies of the way that PRC viewed the UK as a kind of entry point into Europe, perhaps stretching back into the golden era, or often described as the golden era, in the Cameron, George Osborne time, where the UK sought to position itself as China's best friend in Europe. when it was inside the European Union and sort of be that entry point. And I think there's been some thoughts along the lines of London may have some role in the PRC's aspirations to make the renminbi, China's currency, a more internationalized reserve currency for more transactions. I'm not sure. I'm not an expert on international finance, so my understanding is that that's not on the short-term horizon, but that may well have been part of the thinking. If you look again at the location of the site, sort of right next to the City of London, and that could well have been part of the thinking. And ultimately, these things take on a life of their own once they're decided upon and sort of investments are made and costs are sunk into something. Then it sort of becomes something that's the status quo, and to go back on it is going to cause a problem. And that's certainly the line that the PRC has been pushing since this embassy relocation started to become an issue with the town planners at the Tower Hamlets local authority. The PRC sort of immediately started putting pressure on the UK government to say, why can't you just make this happen? Obviously demonstrating some level of ignorance of how the UK's planning systems work, but nonetheless, just kind of indicative of how it basically became, in the view of the PRC party state, it became a sort of foregone conclusion that only a deliberate political conspiracy could explain the UK stalling and ultimately going back on this agreement to let the PRC purchase the site and relocate it. It also, if I might add as well, this on political conspiracies. The PRC is a Marxist-Leninist party state, and fundamentally their underlying philosophy, the orthodox philosophy that the party operates on, is one of a world divided into clashing forces. You're either on one side of the contradiction, the good side, China's side, or the other side. In this case, the primary enemy being the United States, which China probably rightly sees as seeking to contain its growing power, particularly globally, but even within its own home region as well, and sees the United States attempting to prevail on allies like the UK to stymie whatever China is attempting to do, regardless of its own considerations. And so this type of underlying policy-making philosophy on the part of the PRC party state makes it very likely to interpret any kind of stumbling blocks that it encounters through things like UK planning processes and the particular views of people in the Tower Hamlets Council as part of a US-inspired conspiracy to stymie what China is trying to do. And so I think there's sort of bureaucratic reasons in terms of sort of status quos and legacies. I think there are ideological reasons as well, and I think there are economic reasons that the PRC has in the first place sought to expand its presence in this particular part of London.
Yeah, no, I think, again, it's very hard to know exactly what the PRC's goals are because they're very close to it. They don't allow, journalists to come up and ask Xi Jinping, what do you plan to do here? It's much more of an opaque state in that manner. But, one final question for me then, the decision's going to be on January 20th, and it's looking likely that the government's going to, accept the proposals and stuff. So if this acceptance does go forth, are you hopeful about the future of both the embassy and Chinese-UK relations broadly, or do you think it's either negative or it doesn't really have a broad effect in, say, 10, 15 years' time?
That's a very good question. 10 to 15 years' time is very difficult to speculate about,
Yeah, of course.
since the world is seemingly changing day to
Yeah,
day. Um, uh, in the short term, I think probably the most immediate effect will be that the corresponding roadblocks that the PRC seems to have imposed on the UK plan, the expanded embassy in Beijing,
yeah,
will more or less magically sort of be solutions will be found to
yeah,
that. And so that offers the UK the opportunity to expand its own economic and, yes, I would expect intelligence gathering, national security,
yeah,
defense, and all the rest of it capabilities in Beijing and perhaps elsewhere in China, which, in all honesty, is probably a good thing
yeah,
from the point of view of both the UK itself. It's probably in the UK's national interest to have a larger presence inside China, but I think it's also in China's interest to have a larger UK presence in China.
yeah,
That will provide more information coming out of China from people on the ground. May actually end up dispelling certain misconceptions that could arise potentially at very important points in time, maybe during crisis
yeah,
situations, maybe even crisis situations not immediately involving the UK. It could be a crisis situation between China and the US or another of the UK's Five Eyes intelligence alliance allies,
yeah,
and some information that's gathered from the ground in China by an expanded UK presence there might actually be something that allows a crisis to be handled in a more judicious way that avoids a potentially disastrous escalation. So
yeah,
my own sort of ideological prior is that the more countries actually know about what's happening on the ground at a societal level and at a
yeah,
political level in each other's countries, the more likely it is that bargains can be reached and crisis situations can be diffused. And even if you're in what you might define as a fundamentally adversarial relationship, in which the threats overwhelmingly outweigh the economic opportunities, uh, even then, more information is probably a good thing for both sides. Um, so that's from a purely national interest
yeah,
standpoint. I think one thing that also bears noting, however, and this is another point where I sympathise very much with the critics of the embassy proposal in London, and that is the political signalling dimension of it. So if the approval of the PRC's embassy, the PRC's mega embassy, the expansion of the PRC state presence in the centre of London, isn't accompanied by appropriate reaffirmations of UK's commitment to defence of human rights in particular, especially within the UK's borders. Again, going to
yeah,
that issue of transnational repression, which is currently ongoing, the PRC exerts a huge coercive effect on targets and even whole communities, such as Uyghur communities and Tibetan communities inside the UK. If the UK continues to not push back forcefully to actually change that situation, which is currently a situation in which the PRC has various channels through which to violate people's rights inside the UK, then the political signal that's sent by approving an expanded PRC embassy is basically that this type of conduct, this type of transnational repression operation, intimidation of critics, intimidation of Hong Kong activists, etc., and targeted ethnic communities inside Britain is
yeah,
fine. and it's going to be continued to be tolerated. So I think in order to counteract that, the UK needs to make clear that if they're going to approve this expanded diplomatic presence and everything that's entailed with that, that's also going to be accompanied by a renewed focus on holding China to the terms of the 1984 Sino-UK Declaration, which guaranteed Hong Kong's autonomy and freedoms for 50 years. It's an internationally recognised and registered treaty, and that the UK is going to push back and take real action to enable people inside the UK, whether the PRC government likes them or not, be able to exercise their most fundamental rights. And is going to do that in a way that is actually aligned with the UK's basic responsibilities under international human rights law, and actually respects the law of the land in terms of the legal prohibition on activities on behalf of a foreign state that interfere with the exercise of a protected right in the UK. The UK has fallen far short in that regard so far. And so I think approving the embassy, if that's what they're going to do, would actually be a good occasion to make clear that this is not a political statement of kind of fealty and deference to the PRC's political prerogatives, but a principled decision in the UK's national interest that's going to be accompanied by a reaffirmation of the commitment to the most basic principles and values that the UK says it abides by.
Yeah, that all sounds like a really nuanced and expert opinion there. There's a lot of unknowns, there's a lot of potentials, and like if X happens, then Y will happen. But it's a really interesting question, and I thank you so much for your time today, Andrew, as well. It's been really, really great to talk to you, really great to hear your opinions, and to help people back home as well, whether watching on their phone, laptop, or whatever, to just be able to understand the situation more, because it's either covered in the media in a very one-sided way, or it's not covered at all. So thank you so much for your time today.